Welcome to a special BeachTV presentation. I'm Matt Kaplan of University College and Extension Services here at California State University, Long Beach. Congress to Campus brings Washington home to America's colleges and universities. For more than 10 years, it has paired former Democratic representatives with former Republicans and flown them to institutions across the nation. For the next 2 days, they conduct forums and classes, meet informally with students and faculty, and do interviews and talk show appearances like this one. Thousands of students have been challenged to become involved in the legislative process and learn about the value of public service from men and women who have served in Congress. One of the program's founders is a former congressman himself. David Skaggs has said that Congress to Campus is a story of government and politics, positive but not unblemished, told in the compelling voices of those who have lived out democracy's promise and met its challenges in the tough world of national politics. This week, California State University Long Beach is honored to host two very distinguished public servants. Born in Virginia, the Honorable James Coyne served 2 terms in Congress as a Pennsylvania Republican. He moved to the White House in 1984, serving as a special assistant to President Ronald Reagan and as director of private sector initiatives. With degrees from Yale and Harvard, he was also on the faculty of the Wharton School of Business in the 1970s. An enthusiastic pilot, he now serves as president of the National Air Transportation Association based in Washington, D.C. The Honorable David Minge was born and raised in Minnesota. He served the state as a Democratic representative for 4 terms from 1993 to 2001. A year later, he was appointed to the Minnesota Court of Appeals, where he continues to sit. Judge Minge practiced law in Minneapolis and in his hometown of, and I hope I have this right, Congressman, Montevideo, of course. And he also taught at the University of Wyoming College of Law. He has degrees from St. Olaf College and the University of Chicago Law School. Here to talk with former Representatives Coyne and Minge are some of the students elected or appointed by their peers to represent the associated students of CSULB. We're joined by 2 of them in the first half hour of our time together, and we'll hear from 2 more in the second half of this presentation. And here's one that I'm in danger of mangling the way I did Montevideo. Hironao Okahana is Vice President of the Associated Students here at CSU Long Beach. He also serves as Chairman of the AS Senate Board of Directors. Born in Tokyo, this is his 5th year in the U.S. He looks forward to a career in higher education, leadership, and policy development. Brittany Garcia is Secretary of Governmental Affairs for the Associated Students. She's a graduating senior majoring in political science. Originally from San Diego, she now lives in Long Beach. And welcome to all of you to this special presentation. Hiro, let's get started with you. Can you get us going with a question for the Congressman?
Yeah, definitely. Thank you, Matt. Well, I flew into the Washington, D.C. twice, I think, being the student government officer, and I did lobbying a couple of times, but we'll mainly go to state legislature for lobbying for the CSU system. And well, in California we have a term limit, and I understand that the congressman was the advocate for the term limit in the Congress. And well, my perspective was it's kind of hard for us to build the relationship right away. Well, we don't have money to lobby with. Our relationship is basically really the personal relationship, interaction with the legislatures. And having the term limit, I'm not so sure that in future years it's going to be hard for us to build that kind of relationship quickly with a member of the state legislature. And if, well, I don't know what's going to happen, but if Congress actually started having a term limit, it might be even harder for us, the ones that lobby without, well, huge capital, to be kind of harder. So I just kind of want to get some perspective from you two on, let's say, how you view the term limit, potential term limit in the Congress, and our ability as more of the grassroots level, the activism, to get the voice carried out to year and the Congress to Congress or session to session.
Well, I'll defer to Jim. I think he's the expert on term limits, and maybe I can comment.
Well, I wrote a book about term limits, and I was the president of the Americans to Limit Congressional Terms, so I have spent a lot of time on this issue. And as you know, probably, Hero, the U.S. Supreme Court, in a 5-4 decision a few years back, invalidated the rights of states to impose unilaterally term limits on members of Congress. However, we do have, at the federal level, at least on the Republican side of the aisle, term limits on the committee chairmanships, which frankly I think is working very much to the benefit of citizens across the country. I think we have seen throughout the history of Congress situations where individual members have been committee chairmen for 20 years or more and have resisted the ability of new members of Congress and a new generation of political leaders to have the authority. Certainly it's very frustrating for a new member of Congress to come in and be told that you virtually have no chance ever of becoming a chairman as long as so-and-so wants to keep that position. So we on the Republican side of the aisle have seen term limits work, I think, pretty smoothly. We see people leaving their responsibilities to a younger congresswoman or congressman, and it has worked pretty well. But in terms of the term limits for members of Congress more broadly, the Supreme Court has said, in my mind, unfortunately and unwisely, but nevertheless by a 5-4 vote, that the only way to create term limits for Congress is for a constitutional amendment to be developed to do that. And as you know, creating a constitutional amendment, especially something that most members of Congress will oppose internally, is almost an impossibility in this particular case. We therefore have only the option of seeing term limits at the state and local level. And you know, here in one of the states, California, where you do have term limits, good people on both sides of the issue recognize that there have been pluses and minuses. But I think the most important thing about term limits is that it gives an incentive for young people to get involved in politics and not to believe that just because somebody has been there 20 or 30 years, they're unbeatable. We don't want to have a system of government where the powers of incumbency are so strong that it discourages bright young people and a whole new generation of Americans from coming and getting involved in politics.
You know, I would say that I did support term limits, and I had committed myself to observing a limit on the number of terms that I'd be in Congress. At the same time, I recognized that most members of Congress were strongly opposed to it, and most of the party leadership was opposed to it. And they kept on saying, we have term limits, there's the ballot box. Now, as Jim has pointed out, the incumbency is a pretty powerful advantage, and it's fairly rare that the ballot box is a way that you end someone's tenure in Congress, although we're examples of the fact that it can happen. With respect to your precise problem, and that is, how do you as students establish rapport with members of the legislative branch, and is it more difficult if there's turnover? I wouldn't think that the turnover would be a cause for concern within your student advocacy groups. And I say this because you have turnover already just in the student population. And the fact that you have new members of Congress coming is somewhat consistent or parallel with what you're going through as student organizations. And I would think it would probably be a neutral consideration in terms of your ability to convey your message.
Well, I guess my question is that, if let's say you can create a constitutional amendment today and adopt it, how long you put the limit, like how much of a time limit? And I think going through state legislature or the Congress, how long do you think the learning curve for a new member to be? Because sometimes it's really good to have that long supporter for higher education. Well, us students leave, but the university will stay and students are coming. So.
Well, I think one of the advantages of term limits is that you will have more turnover and more people and more careers will view that as an opportunity. For example, perhaps we need more college professors or college deans, chairmen in Congress. And if they thought that they could go to Congress for a short period of time and have a lot of influence, maybe more people in other careers would take the time and effort to become an elected official. I think also you have to look at it from the point of view of the congressperson. If he's only going to be there for a short period of time, maybe he'll do a better job. Maybe he'll be more energetic and more responsible for his community, because he'll be coming back to that community. What you see today more often than not is members of Congress believe that that will be their career forever and just stay in Congress until the proverbial hell freeze is over. And I think we need more change. But my biggest goal in supporting term limits is to get more people involved from more areas of our society, more lines of work, to get involved in politics.
Congressman, if I could ask you a follow-up about that. Here in California, where, as you pointed out, we do have term limits, there is concern from some quarters that those term limits prevent members of our legislature from establishing the broad level of knowledge that might help them with issues, and that therefore they have to become much more dependent on their staff, and to a degree more dependent also on lobbyists, on advocates for different issues. Do you see that as a downside to this, or is there a way to combat that, or is it not a problem?
Well, I think it's a consideration, because I was going to bring that up. It's one of the arguments I've heard consistently about a problem with term limits, is that with the turnover, you're not developing the expertise within the body of elected officials, and instead the expertise is going to be with the staff and perhaps with the executive branch. On the other hand, if the number of terms allows you to serve 12 years, I would like to think that after 4 years you'd sort of be up and running. You'd have 8 years when you could be very productive. One problem that I saw is that often you're working on a legislative agenda, and you have a critical initiative, and something like the Farm Bill comes up every 5 years. And so instead of being able to pursue that initiative in the critical year, all of a sudden you're out of there because you're term limited, and the society or the country loses that advocacy role that you're able to play at that crucial point in time. Unfortunately, there's always another legislative initiative, and you're always tempted to say, well, if I could just get this one additional item passed, I would be satisfied with my career. But I'm not sure that magic point is ever reached.
Congressman Coyne.
Well, your point is often raised, and of course I look at Washington historically being one where in the world of no term limits, we have granted to the staff far more power than our founding fathers ever intended. And then there are many, many members of Congress, especially those that have been there 30 and 40 years. They are the ones most likely to sort of lean back and say, I'm going to let my staff do everything. But it's the young, aggressive people who have come in, men and women who maybe only think they're going to be there for 8 years, like David won, who are saying, I'm not going to let my staff do everything. I'm going to take control and have the reins. So I don't think there's really any evidence that I've seen that the staff becomes more powerful. I do think that there has been a trend in terms of the complexity of Congress, the complexity of the issues, and the power of the media, where members of Congress and their fundraising obligations, they're more and more involved in doing things which force them to rely on their staffs ever more. And of course, the other part of the reality of being in Congress is that most of them are generalists. We're the ones that are expected to know a little bit about a whole wide range of issues. And so in order for us to be served in any Congress, I think we're going to have to rely upon specialists, whether it's in health care, agriculture, foreign policy, and those are important needs. And I think we're always going to need staff, but we have to have them in the right role, not to become decision makers as much as aides to those of us who make the decisions.
I don't want to cut this issue off. Brittany, I know there's another issue that you'd like to move on to, but if either of you have any other follow-ups on the term limits.
No, I think I'm ready for my question. Change it around a little bit. Obviously, with my position, naturally, I'm interested in issues that young people, are having with our government and things they want to see change, things they're worried about. And one of those things, I believe, is the Social Security system. So my question for you is, do you think that there is a remedy for the possible collapse of our current Social Security system? And if you don't agree that the system is at risk, what are the measures that have been taken within Congress in the past or should be taken to ensure the longevity of such a program?
Congressman Minge, if you...
Well, I think the Social Security system is at risk, but I don't think the Social Security system is in any imminent danger of collapse. If you look at the at the long-term projections, it's my recollection that the Social Security system will be able to honor all of its commitments, fully honor them, up to about 2050. And after that, it would be more of, so to speak, a hand-to-mouth existence. They would have the resources that came in that year to pay the benefits to the maximum extent possible, and it might be 40 to 60% of the benefit level. Now, if we made corrections in the Social Security system at this point in time, we could extend that period substantially. And a few examples would be if the retirement age was extended out. For my age group, it's been extended out to about 66 years and 6 months, and so it's no longer 65. If it were extended out another year or two, if the cost of living adjustment was modified, that would have to be reduced. That would extend it out. Of course, there's discussion about putting more money into the Social Security system. I think that raises some concerns. People are saying, why should I put more money in? Let's figure out how to extend it by other devices. But that certainly is a part of the mix.
Congressman Coyne.
Yeah, one of the students we had in one of our classes this morning responded in our discussion about Social Security as though he really didn't think it was going to be there. It was on a track of kind of, he was very skeptical as whether it would be there when he needs it and whether it would account for much of his retirement earn. And obviously inflation is going to play a role. There are a lot of people who don't contribute to the Social Security, whose income is outside of the Social Security system to some degree. But I think David has been quite right. I mean, the current system is not in imminent danger on the Social Security retirement side. Now, David didn't mention the health care side, which is a little bit more dire. Just today, we see reports in the paper that health care is rising in cost at twice the rate of the rest of inflation in America. And if we continue to see that kind of dramatic growth in health care costs, I don't think there's any doubt that we're going to have a crisis on Medicare side of Social Security within my lifetime. And how we fix that is probably a more complicated issue than the retirement issue. David made a very good point, which many people have proposed. If we just add a month or 2 or 3 every decade to the retirement age and gradually make these relatively modest changes, and then every year make just 0.1% or 0.2% change in the inflation adjustment, we will be able to keep the Social Security retirement program healthy. But the Medicare program is much, much more complicated because both the expenditure and the inflow and outflow sides are subject to uncertainties about the future. If healthcare prices grow at a rate which at twice the rate of inflation for the next 20 years, we'll be spending 1/3 of our national income on healthcare. Literally. And how your generation is going to pay for all the healthcare needs of our generation, it's insane. And I think we're going to we've been spoiled in the last 10 or 20 years thinking that every new invention and every new drug and every new treatment should be paid for by Medicare for everybody, no matter how much it costs our society. And that is a much tougher thing to ration and to control. So I think we need a commission. Frankly, Congress, historically, I was in the White House when we did the Social Security Commission in the 80s, and it really wasn't Congress that solved the problem. Congress sort of kicked the football over to another commission and said, okay, you guys and the White House and OMB and Department of Health and Human Services come up with some solutions, the IRS. And they did, and they supported. And it was because both the leadership, bipartisan leadership in the House and Senate and the President all kind of made an agreement to honor what the commission. We've not been so lucky in the last 20 years to see that kind of cooperation between the House and the Senate and the White House. You would think we would have been able to do it over the last few years with one party in control of all three, but we haven't. And we really are going to need sometime in the next 5 years the political will to bring together those same forces to solve these long-term Medicare problems.
Congressman Minge, did you want to add anything now that health care has also been brought into this?
Well, I think that Jim has done a pretty good job in summarizing that. The only added perspective I'd like to mention has to do with the burden that all of this is placing on your generation. That is, people between the ages of,
18 to 24.
birth up to 30, 40 years old, are facing not only the Social Security and the Medicare liabilities that are not completely funded, but also an increasingly large national debt. And this is a millstone around the neck of your generation when it comes to trying to address whatever problems our nation may be facing in year 2030, 2050, and so on.
Brittany, I think you had a follow-up along those lines and how these issues may be keeping some people in your generation from politics.
Yeah, I mean, as you probably know, the 18 to 24-year-old voter group is really low. It's only a fourth, you know, and so I was also wondering how do you think Congress's reaction to the Social Security situation, like the remedies you were saying about changing, you know, long-term, how do you think that will affect the voting pattern of that age group?
Well, I very much hope that age group becomes much more active politically. The cold, sad reality of politics is that politicians pay more attention to people and age group segments that vote than ones that don't. And I mean, you can tell in your own community, and any time a congressman comes home, he always has every senior citizen center he can find on his calendar and his agenda. But they don't always visit every college in every community, because he says, you know, he goes to the senior citizen, all those people are going to vote, and you've got to learn to become more active. And I was saying to one of the classes this morning, I'm absolutely amazed that people, when they have the opportunity to vote the first time, when they've turned 18 and they can vote, why any American would want to miss that opportunity to vote the first time. I mean, I can kind of understand maybe they miss voting when they're 43, but their first vote, that's the one. I mean, here's something that people all over the world just die to be able to do. You've got, and only, as you say, less than 25% of the young people in America take that first vote. So please pass along. It's in their interest, very much so, to do that.
I'm not going to give them a pass when they're 43 either, but Congressman Minge.
Well, you know, I think that there's a lot of cynicism about the political process, and people are saying, what difference does my vote make, and I don't know enough, or I'm busy, and on and on. And unfortunately, these excuses roll off our lips too easily. And I think that we forget that the United States has had a representative democratic form of government for the last 220 years. It is a fragile experiment in governance. We have had this longer than any other country in the history of our civilization, broad base. And if we don't work at maintaining this, it can't survive. And it takes participation. We can't expect more out of government than we actually are able to accomplish personally, and we have to remember that half of our marriages end in divorce. And if we can't get along that well within our families, our homes, we have to be realistic about what we can expect from Sacramento or what we can expect from Washington, D.C. And government wasn't set up to be efficient. It was set up to avoid the tyranny that we experienced with the British and King George III. And so we have to recognize the checks and balances and two branches, you know, the House and the Senate. All of this adds complexity to making decisions and governance, and we don't get along that well with each other. So let's not let our cynicism overwhelm the reality of making the system work, and the responsibility that we have to take this institution and make it function, hand it on to our children and grandchildren.
Yeah, I'm afraid the cynicism is at its highest point right now, I believe, with the
it's always, people have always been cynical about government or politics. If you read American history, you can look back, and George Washington and Thomas Jefferson, John Adams' time, there were scandals, there was cynicism, there was corruption. There's nothing that's really new here.
Yeah.
We only have 2 or 3 minutes left in this portion of our show. Hero, if you have another brief question that you'd like to throw at the Congressman, otherwise we can stop a little bit early, or maybe, Brittany, there's something you'd like to follow up with.
I don't want to take the next set of group questions, but yeah. Well, I guess you mentioned this whole cynicism is all the time, along with the politics. What make you to bring into the politics and to stick into the politics until after your retirement from the Congress and until this point, and to come to the colleges?
Well, in terms of Jim and myself, I think we recognize that we've benefited from this system of government. We're believers in the system of government, and we appreciate the opportunity to come to a campus like this and share our experience with students and hopefully interest some of the students or stimulate them to participate in the political process as well. And we entered the political process with no rich uncle or a silver spoon in our mouth. It was an accident. We both happened to be in the right place at the right time. And if lightning can strike and we can have an opportunity, you can have an opportunity too.
Congressman Coyne, we've got about a minute left.
Well, Hero, I grew up in the Philadelphia area, not too far from Independence Hall. In fact, I lived just about 3 blocks from Independence Hall for the first 10 years of my marriage. And when you walk past Independence Hall and the Liberty Bell, and you absorb a little bit the history and the fascinating vision of our founding fathers 230 years ago, and listen to what they said at that time about, of the people, by the people, for the people. I like to remember that part, by the people, that we, the people, are the ones that make it happen, and we've got to raise our hand from time to time and get involved. And it's, I hate to say it as simply as this, but it is exciting. It is fun to be involved in our nation's political system. Just as an observer, reading it and knowing about it, I think it's far more interesting to follow politics than it is to follow baseball scores or something like that. I enjoy it. It's an exciting adventure, and to be part of it is something that every single American can do. You can't all become stars on a local baseball team, but we can all become stars in politics.
Congressman, I think you may be preaching to the choir here, but even the choir needs to be preached to now and then. Hero and Brittany, thank you very much for joining us in this first half of the show, but we're not done yet. This is Congress to Campus, a special BeachTV presentation. We're going to be back with former Congressman Coyne and Minge, and 2 more of CSULB student leaders right after this break.
It's time to make your career move. With quality training and education from the University of Choice, Cal State Long Beach. Achieve personal and professional excellence by enrolling in career-enhancing programs offered through University College and Extension Services. Courses include computer technology, management, leadership, global transportation, accelerated degree programs, and more. Make your career move now. Call today for your free catalog.
Welcome back to a special BeachTV presentation. I'm Matt Kaplan. The Congress to Campus program has brought 2 former members of the House of Representatives to our university. Though they represented different parties, they are united by a dedication to public service that extends far beyond their terms in the House. The Honorable James Coyne, a Republican, represented the state of Pennsylvania and now serves as president of the National Air Transportation Association. The Honorable David Minge served Minnesota as a Democratic member of Congress and now sits on the Minnesota Court of Appeals. Shefali Mistry is the president of the Associated Students. The art major was raised in Corona, California. She plans a career in arts administration and advocacy. Zaira Tinoco is the Associated Students treasurer. She is a major in political science and will graduate in June, after which she will pursue a career in finance. And we didn't toss a coin or anything, so Shefali is president. I think I'll turn to you to throw out the first question in this part of our program.
All right. It was touched on earlier that many students feel disillusioned by the political process and that they believe their votes don't count or their voices aren't heard. I was curious as to whether you thought that voting was the only way that students' voices could be heard, and if you don't agree, what other options do they have?
Well, certainly not. I mean, our founding fathers, and I think anybody who understands politics knows that there's a whole host of ways in which citizens, young or old, can get involved and have their voices heard. I happen to think that voting is the minimum level that you ought to pursue. If you don't vote, you almost don't have a right to complain, as one of the students said today in one of the classes. But beyond that, if you consider the range of opportunities, it's tremendous. One is just to communicate with your political leaders, or to communicate with the public, to write letters to a local TV station or newspaper, to become active in local associations, or become active in something that you believe in, whether it's arts in your case, or finance, or something else. Through whatever your line of work is, you can become politically astute and participate through communications and through advocacy forums of one form or another. But beyond that, there's a whole host of opportunities within and on the fringes of government. You can become an intern, or a staff person, or a campaign worker for a member of Congress or a candidate at the local level. You can go to Washington and actually seek a job working either in Congress or in one of the other branches of government. And of course, finally, you can have an opportunity, hopefully, as we all have, to become a candidate for office. David and I both started at a relatively low level. I started as a township supervisor in a small community in Pennsylvania, and David was on the school board of a relatively rural area in Minnesota. And every American, believe it or not, has an opportunity to do that. There are thousands and thousands of political opportunities in America where they are looking for people to get involved. So it's not that hard at all.
Congressman Minge.
Well, I would agree, and I think that Jim has done a good job of summarizing the variety of opportunities that exist. So I'd say go for it. Don't be cynical. Don't be reticent.
Zaira, how about you?
Well, I was wondering that based on your experience in Congress and comparing it to the Congress you see today, what are some of the changes that you observe and maybe some of the effects, positive or negative, of each of the changes?
Well, one of the changes that occurred during the time that I was in Congress is that the Republican conference imposed term limits on committee chairs. And the result has been that some members of Congress have retired from Congress after their leadership position came to an end. Others have rotated into other leadership positions, but I think that's been wholesome because it's opened up the process some, and that, I think, is always beneficial. Another change that I have seen is in campaign financing. Now, I'm not sure that I would say this is an improvement. Campaigns continue to become more expensive. Financing continues to be more creative. And the difficulty that members of Congress face in raising money, especially if you're going to challenge an incumbent, can be overwhelming. And I think it's discouraged a lot of good people from running for office. And it's led occasionally to this type of financing having it compromises aspects of the political process. Some would say the integrity of the political process. So I believe we have to constantly be vigilant. We have to be open to reform legislation and to innovation, and try to make sure that we maintain a commitment to an open and transparent political process, and one that's making decisions that are in the best interests of the whole country, and not just to those who are perhaps the most affluent or are able to afford the most articulate lobbying firms in Washington.
Congressman Coyne, your time in Congress didn't overlap Congressman Minge's. What do you see?
Well, I first came to Congress in 1981, and of course there's been many changes. The technology side of Congress has been overwhelming. I was on the first computer committee in Congress back in 1981, and I was amazed at just the concept of being able to send emails within Congress. Our Congress was the first one where one member of Congress could send an email to another, and I made a proposal that, well, we've got to figure out a way to get constituents to send us emails, and so we could send a request over to one of the agencies and get things fixed. And of course, I never imagined that this would evolve into the wonderful technological capabilities that now exist in Congress and routing information around. Well, it's really transformed the place. But in another area, I'm much less sanguine, and that's in the area of financial management in Congress, especially in the area of budgeting, and also in the appropriations and authorizations process. Many students may not appreciate that the way Congress spends money has like 3 different processes. There's a budget, which is not unsimilar to the budgets that we all have in our own lives and businesses. Then there's an authorizing committee, which says, okay, given that the budget is this, these are the priorities that we ought to have. We ought to spend money, let's say, in agriculture in this way and in transportation this way. And then there's the appropriations process, which is kind of the guy with the checkbook who actually says, okay, we're actually going to spend this money on that. But over and above that process, which is complicated enough, we have seen the growth in the last 25 years of something called earmarks. And a lot of people perhaps say, well, what do I mean earmarks? Well, that's where a member of Congress, at the very last minute sometimes, in this long process, throws in another idea that says, okay, let's put in another $5 million for X or Y or Z. And many of the earmarks may be perfectly good things that need to be supported by the federal government. But for them to be done outside of the process, in this kind of who's got the most favors way, and it might be okay if there were just 5 or 10 or 50 earmarks, but we now are at the point in our legislative process that typically in an average Congress there might be over 1,000 earmarks. Things that have been outside the process snuck in at the last minute. Frankly, I think that's led to a lot of lack of discipline, a lot of wasteful spending, a lot of who's going to get more favors and more earmarks, and I hope that process can be reformed in the next few years.
I would just add that some people call that pork barrel spending, and the mischief that's associated with that can be very expensive, it's demoralizing, and it skews the process because instead of projects being, so to speak, peer-reviewed like they'd be in a research setting in a university, they're being reviewed in a political setting, and the question is who is on what committee and who's in the jaybird seat and who's going to be able to bring home the bacon, so to speak. And when I was in the House for the last 4 years, I was a co-chair of what was called the Pork Busters Coalition. And we worked to try to expose this type of spending, but I regret to say that we did not find that a lot of our colleagues were responsive to the criticism. And on the Senate side, John McCain was very active on this. And so it's a dicey thing, and I'd like to see some reforms made there because it's mushroomed out of control.
Can the genie be put back in the bottle?
Oh, I think it can be. What is needed is some strong rules in the House and the Senate, and if those rules are adopted by the respective legislative bodies, and there's a commitment to discipline, you can change these patterns. And I know that we had to do it in the 1990s and 1980s with respect to spending to try to eliminate the deficit, and we were successful in doing that. Unfortunately, it's returned with a vengeance, but those rules, for example, they were called pay-go rules if people are real budget gurus or nuts. We could have those rules reinstated and parallel rules to deal with the earmarks or the pork barrel projects.
Shefali, let's come back to you. Do you have another question for the Congressman?
It's sort of a follow-up to my last question. Just coming from the other side, in your experiences and in your observations, how would you say that Congress or other government officials relate to and communicate with students coming from their side?
How they communicate with students?
Students or voters of the 18 to 24 range.
Well, one way is going around to campuses. I know that when I was in Congress, and Jim mentioned this, when you come back on the weekend or during a break, you'll visit campuses and talk to classes, much like we've done with the Congress to Campus program, and try to meet with students where they are. Similarly, you find that a number of the organizations that you're meeting with have a student component, or young people that are active in the organization, and you'll see people in that type of a setting. So those are a couple of things that I saw happen, and I think that we've had a good experience here. The students have been very active, had excellent questions, and it's been exciting. It's been fun to be at Long Beach, and I just wish each campus I visited has the same enthusiastic approach.
Unfortunately, in many respects, members of Congress as a group have a hard time meeting all their communications and interaction responsibilities because they're very busy. And I think one of the most common criticisms of members of Congress is that you only see them around election time. And I know every college in America sees politicians around election time. I'm sure this university is no different. But most serious congressmen, if they have a college in their district, I had 2 small colleges in my district, and I visited them almost monthly on a very regular basis, and found it very rewarding, if only because you get some very thoughtful, stimulating discussions with not only the students but the faculty as well. Mm-hmm. But beyond that, we have got to do a better job nationally at discussing not so much a politician's personal agenda, but the issues that are before Congress with young people. I mean, I'm encouraged, frankly, and this may sound a little strange, but I'm encouraged when I see things like The Daily Show on TV, which are really oriented toward young people. And yet they do discuss, obviously with a lot of cynicism and a lot of humor, some of the important issues, and it gets people's minds thinking. Even shows like, some of the cartoon shows, like The Simpsons and so forth, will get people thinking about important political issues. So I look at the media as providing more opportunities to reach students and young people, but it's getting harder. In the old days, there were very few communications channels that students were even participating in, and now there's such a diversity of media options. It's just hard to know where to find students, where to send a message so that they will see it. Our simplest way, of course, is to come to universities, but that doesn't do the whole job.
Zyra, I want to come back to you in a moment, but if I could throw in a question of my own. Gentlemen, we mentioned that both of you have taught at the university level, and I wonder if that experience, how that affected your service in Congress or service since Congress.
Well, in my situation, teaching in a law school was a part of my career. It was an exciting part of my career. And being on the campus gave me a better understanding of how a university operates from the faculty and the administration side and the financing, and seeing students struggling with the financial obligations that they have coming out of a law school or a university education is also sobering. And the importance of having a good student aid program nationally so that we are educating young people so we have a globally competitive workforce. I guess it really was driven home for me that this is critical. And the other aspect of it that I'd like to emphasize is the importance of people in the political process being available and participating in the classroom. Because I could see in the teaching that I did after I left Congress that students were curious, just like they've been here at Long Beach, about what's it like to be in Congress, what's it like to meet with the President or work on this issue or that issue or the White House or Social Security like we talked about. And it's critical, I think, for people who have been in public office, who are in public office, to be available to pass this information on, and at the same time to be candid, to not just kind of varnish it or whitewash it so that it looks like it's all just going well. People don't believe that. They know it's not all going well. They know there are severe problems, and I think that being forthright about it or realistic is important to being credible.
Congressman Coyne.
Well, he did a good job answering that question broadly from the education point of view, but also from a personal point of view. Being involved as a faculty member, in my case, was something that really helped me develop many of the skills that I think are important for people who go into public service. When a teacher stands in front of a class and learns how to speak to an audience and listen to their concerns and to promote interaction. I mean, a good teacher wants to get a give and take in the classroom, as we've seen from the teachers here. That's the kind of two-way communication a politician wants to get as well. I found it a very important part of my learning curve is to build the confidence to stand up in front of people, and I hope that people don't think that you can only come from one career to go into politics. You can be a butcher, a baker, a candlestick maker, whatever, but you do have to have some interest in people. You do have to like communicating to people, and you can't be too shy, which is some good advice for potential politicians.
Zyra, it's your turn.
Well, some of the financial hardships the students face are medically related, either if it's with themselves or with one of their family members that they need to help. And we touched earlier on the difficulties of Medicare, which reminded me of the challenges that we're facing with health care. And I was wondering your personal perspective on what this country can do to have a good national health care plan, and if we do need to do that, because this summer I spent doing an internship in New York where I saw a lot of companies having financial difficulties themselves because healthcare costs were very out of control. So I was wondering, what would government's role be in that, and what are some plans that we can implement now for the future?
Well, healthcare has been characterized as a national crisis for at least a generation. And I can remember going all the way back to Harry Truman's presidency when there was a proposal to have a national health care program. And that was defeated. I think that President Nixon was interested in a national approach to health care. And of course, we had an enormous undertaking in 1993 and 1994 when President Clinton was first elected. And there was a health care plan that was proposed. It was very weighty. I think it probably weighed in excess of 10 pounds, 1,500, 2,000 pages. And it was extremely comprehensive. And it tried to address the things that you're talking about. How do you finance it? How do you keep the costs affordable? How do you make sure it's universal, that everybody in America, all Americans are participants? And that effort collapsed. And the collapse of that effort in the early Clinton administration, I think, discouraged a lot of people from taking on the task again. And I would like to see us take the task up, but I see it's now occurring at the state level, and several states have said that they think it's critical to have a state health care plan if there's not going to be a national one, and perhaps it's going to be up to one of you to run for Congress to try to address this issue and see if we can bring back to the fore a willingness to face up to the problems that we have with affordable health care in America.
Congressman Coyne.
Yeah, I agree with what my friend David has said, because we have not done a very good job in Congress dealing with this. But part of the reason for that may be some serious misgivings among many Americans as to whether a monolithic federal plan is really necessarily the best thing. And there are a lot of thoughtful people who lately have been saying that here's an area where the diversity of our states may really provide a real opportunity for our nation to try different things out in different states. I mean, the federal government isn't the only level of government, and maybe it's not right for everything. And when it tries to put everybody into one big national plan, you have the risk of developing shortages. And you may see, as other national health care plans have in other parts of the world, a kind of rationing of health care where, well, sure, the government has a great program, but you have to wait 5 months before you can see a doctor. And so there are opportunities, I think, for different states to propose different alternatives, different ways of getting competition, both on the medicine side and the manpower side. I mean, there are two big issues in healthcare: our manpower, the cost of reimbursing physicians and nurses and other healthcare professionals, so they're attracted to healthcare, and they're in sufficient supply to meet our needs. We're going to need more healthcare professionals. So I'm sure your nursing department knows here at Cal State, we're going to need more doctors. We're going to need tremendous manpower. And we can't create a federal system that puts a ceiling on what they can earn. We want to create incentives for them to come into that career rather than doing something else. Similarly, on the pharmaceutical side, we've got to create incentives for research and development and the professional advancement. But frankly, we have seen clearly evidence of abuses in our healthcare system. We've seen billing abuses of Medicare and Medicaid that have been fraudulent. We've seen pharmaceutical firms that have taken advantage of patents and extended them needlessly. We have seen pricing questions that just seem on the face of it to be unfair. So I think what we've come to realize at many quarters in Washington is that what we have been doing of trying to federalize this whole thing may be a lot of well-meaning people going down a path that didn't provide enough creativity and competition. And getting the states involved with new ideas may be the best way, from my perspective, to go forward.
Shefali, I wish we could continue with that topic, but there's so many that we could take up today. Do you want to bring up another question, as we have maybe 5 minutes left? This may be the last big issue we get to cover.
This was actually completely in a different direction. Just, I think, for students who are maybe looking to get into politics. What led you, did you expect to get into politics as a career? If not, what led you to that? And looking back, would you do anything differently?
Well, I was interested in the decision-making process, public policy, politics, from the time I was in high school. And I remember going to city council meetings and county board meetings to see what was happening in my community. And these old guys would look back at me and they'd say, "And what are you here for?" And I just want to listen, I'd say. They thought, "Well, that's curious. What's wrong with you?" So I have had a long-term interest. I must say that I did not expect to get to participate as a member of Congress. I wasn't sure I'd ever serve as a judge. But looking back, I'm very appreciative of the opportunities. It's been an honor to serve in these different capacities. And I suppose the only thing I would do differently is recognize that one has a limited time, and to redouble my efforts to try to advance policies that I thought were critical. And just an example, we talked about health care. In a way, it was a missed opportunity. I think it's tragic that we did not do something, and hopefully these issues can be kept on the front burner and they will be resolved.
Congressman Coyne, how did you get into this line of work?
Well, it's kind of ancient history, of course, but back in the 70s, believe it or not, there was an energy crisis, not unlike the one that we've experienced here in California, among other places, over the last year. And one of the real focuses of that energy crisis happened to be in eastern Pennsylvania. We had probably the most extreme degree of fuel shortage during the 1978-79 crisis. In fact, we had lines at gas stations 2 miles long, and people would get out of their car and shoot at people who were trying to butt in line. It got literally violent at gas stations. And of course, in those days, the gasoline price went from 30 cents a gallon up to 90 cents a gallon, but it was, a huge increase. And our government made some really serious mistakes back in that first energy crisis. They started putting price controls and a lot of things, and we're not, I didn't think, very innovative in some of the new technologies that I was familiar with as an engineer. I had an engineering background, of course, and I really believed that there were better ways to solve the energy crisis rather than to just tell people they couldn't go out and buy gasoline, and that we could be innovative. And so I started speaking out as an engineer about the energy crisis at the time. And fortunately, that was a year in which a lot of voters were interested in listening about energy questions. And so it was an issue, a very different issue than what has driven most people into politics, I think.
Thank you.
We are just about out of time. I think we have just 2 or 3 minutes left. I want to see if either of you have anything else that you'd like to ask the Congressman.
Well, maybe to follow up a little bit on that also, for our current students who are interested in a career in politics, what are just maybe some simple things that they can do now to be where you were at?
Congressman, very quickly.
Yeah, I would urge that students participate in campaigns with candidates for office here at the local level or at the state legislative level or congressional, and become familiar with how the political process works from the inside, learn to know some of the key players in the process, and I think that it's a very important contribution that can be made, and it also opens one's eyes as to what the opportunities would be for you personally to be a candidate, to be an office holder. And I have seen people who were interns for members of Congress that came back and defeated those members later and took that seat, and they became the member of Congress.
Congressman Coyne.
Yeah, you've got two times of congressional cycle that are important to focus on. One is the campaign, and one is everything else. And here we are just 6 weeks or so away from the midterm election. if you have just a little bit of interest, get involved in this campaign. So this is exactly the time, today, tomorrow. Any member of this audience can call up a candidate for Congress or an incumbent congressman and say, you know, I know you have to put up 10,000 yard signs in the next 6 weeks. I'd love to help you to do it. I know you have to stuff 5 million envelopes. I'd love to. It's demeaning work maybe, but it's a good way to get in. And then once you get in and have done a little work for a member of Congress, especially if the man wins or the woman wins, they'll be very grateful to you, and maybe there'll be an opportunity when you graduate to go to work for their office. Other than that, of course, outside of the campaign cycle, there's all sorts of internships and things like that to explore, and I think we have that information to pass on.
Gentlemen, ladies, we are out of time. I'm sorry to say it has been a delight. I want to mention a little disclaimer for the university. You gentlemen put the hat out there. I certainly hope that we've gotten you 2 dirtbag baseball caps so you don't have to fight over that.
No, I've got one too.
We each have a dirtbag cap, and we will wear it proudly.
Thank you so much.
Go the beach.
Go beach. We want to thank our student guests, and especially James Coyne and David Minge for joining us today. We're especially grateful to Congress to Campus, that program, for making their visit to California State University Long Beach possible. This has been a special presentation by BeachTV. We hope you'll check out the other great programming that BeachTV offers every day. Thanks very much for watching.